And here's the thing. Is it for the state to feed children? Marcus Rashford, as you've been hearing, the England and United striker, vented despair last night as the Labour Party's plea for free school meals to be extended over the holidays fell on deaf ears. There was some unease as well, it should be said, on the Tory benches as well. A motion on providing 1.4 million disadvantaged kids with £15 a week food vouchers during the holidays, this to go up to Easter 2021, was voted down. 322 votes to 261. That's a government majority of 61. When I first saw this story last night, I was absolutely raging. I was incandescent on this. One of those moments when you find yourself pacing around the room, raging at what you've just heard. How could anybody not want to feed hungry children? It's a no-brainer. It's an absolute outrage. It's an affront to basic human decency. I think of my own background and all that entails and what went with it. How can you not want to feed hungry kids? And then I sort of I had to have a bit of a reality check on this one. I was sort of asking the wrong question. I was doing exactly kind of what the socialist argument requires you to do, and that is to angle any issue from the most troubling, seductive, traumatic or disadvantaged perspective, and then attempt to make a wholesale policy fit. It's the politics of the scoundrel. It's the last refuge of political unintelligibility. It's kind of there, really. We don't make laws based on worst-case scenarios for good reason. Otherwise, we'd be jailing people for all manner of unexpected criminal outcomes. It's called, legally, bad law. Asking, do you want children to go hungry, is right up there with asking, do Black Lives Matter? An obvious no and yes to both of those questions. But there are huge nuances and issues on both as well. Do you want to feed hungry kids? Again, no brainer. But you could totally rephrase that question and ask, is it the state's job to supply your dinner, if you want to look at it that way? Where is the cut-off point between state intervention and personal responsibility? That's not a right-wing question. That's just a right question. So, a number of problems in asking the question. Firstly, and this is the problem that I think governments look at when they're asked about school meals or extending them, you could never reverse the policy. Once you put that in motion, you could never reverse it. You then become the government who took food away from kids. It's a trap. Perhaps it's an intentional trap set by Labour, but it's an absolute trap, much like the winter fuel allowance, which was meant to be a temporary measure over one particularly cold winter. Not only did it remain in place, it became a political football with governments upping the benefit year after year. You then arrive in this kind of irreversible moral cul-de-sac. Do you want to be the government that takes away heating from old people? Similarly with this, do you want to be the government that takes away food from hungry kids? If you implement it, it kind of stays forever. And the second point that we've already spoken of is that we already have a system in place to address this. I mean, this is the government's position, and I do understand this. It's called the welfare system. Now, you'll get no argument from me about the imperfections of the welfare system. There are many of them. But that's precisely what that system is there to do, to look after those who are falling through the cracks to varying degrees and to make sure that kids don't go hungry. We already have a system for feeding people who are struggling. We've got child benefit on top of whatever else somebody might be entitled to for that very reason. Where does government responsibility start and stop? 0344 499 1000. The third point, and arguably the one I feel really strongly about on this, is the politics of mischief. It's the easiest thing in the world for an opposition politician to propose an amendment or a motion for no other reason than to enjoy the political fallout from the government opposing it. What would stop the Labour Party next week suggesting the government pay the gas and electricity bills for the 2 million poorest people in the country? Throw in a few celebrities to spread the word on social media, showcase your indignation at the dispatch box, belch out a rabble-rousing speech on the backbenches, and then watch the government vote it down. Where would that stop? It leaves you with a beautiful own goal to tell the world that the Tories don't care about people and their inability to pay their lecky bill. They would rather watch people thrown out onto the streets than help the vulnerable. Where does that end? I propose a motion that anyone earning under 15 grand a year should get free petrol in order to encourage social mobility. I'd like to add an amendment that every pensioner gets a smartphone so they can keep in touch with their grandchildren. It's good for mental health. This could go on forever. And it's been used many, many times. And I think quite recently, wasn't there an amendment on giving nurses a pay rise, despite the fact the government already had in motion plans to give nurses a pay rise, or they had done or something. So it just becomes, just because a Labour MP proposes the motion doesn't authenticate it. Anyone can pull out a social problem and propose it at any time. And the fourth point on this, and clearly worth a mention, is the very party advancing this, the Labour Party, also want a 2-week national lockdown, maybe a 3 or 4 week national lockdown. If you ever wanted to impoverish huge swathes of people, particularly those already struggling, then what better way than to lock down the entire economy and remove the ability to even earn a wage in the first place? Is there anyone, by the way, in the UK who cannot give their kids a basic meal? That's not a loaded question, it's a genuine question. 0344 499 1000. I mean, if you had very little else coming in, there is, a child benefit system in place. Where does government responsibility start? Where does it stop? 0344 499 1000. So beware of politicians bearing gifts. And if you look through much of social media today, from the Schneiders to the Boy Jones, and they're all at it. There's heartless government. Out, you don't want to feed hungry kids. Well, the question didn't exist until somebody just said it. So by somebody asking the question doesn't make the issue any more real, or less real for that matter, than it was the day before. You could just play that game all day long. It's possibly going to be a method over there at Labour HQ that you just keep ratcheting up those kind of uncomfortable amendments and motions, keep putting them forward, watch the government vote against them, and before you realise it, you've built up this cracking narrative about the nasty, uncaring. I mean, this comes from did these people not hear what the Chancellor has just announced? It's another squillion quid that's going to be spent because of COVID rules, the furlough scheme, the grants, the loans, the assistance, the deferring of mortgage payments and rent. And I mean, the list goes on. I mean, this government has out-Corbyned Corbyn in terms of helping people in that respect. And the school meal thing, and don't get me wrong, I'm not fully sold on it. I am uncomfortable with because the phrase is so damning. Do you want to feed hungry kids? Well, yeah, of course I do. And then you watch a dispatches program or a panorama. It'll show you kids, playing in a mold-filled room, eating beans on toast because their mum, totally on her own, trying to raise 5 kids, is struggling to just put basic food on the table. And you can have all the arguments. I mean, have a listen again to the MP. This is the Tory Brendan Clark-Smith, when he was talking about this in the House of Commons yesterday.
Where is the slick PR campaign encouraging absent parents to take some responsibility for their children? I do not believe in nationalising children. Instead, we need to get back to the idea of taking responsibility. And this means less celebrity virtue signalling on Twitter by proxy and more action to tackle the real causes of child poverty.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because, what Marcus Rashford has done, he's totally entitled to do. He's a professional footballer that grew up with very little. His mum struggled, but she apparently, by all accounts, made an incredible job of it. Now he's a millionaire United England player, and he's going back to where he started and saying, look, I know what this was like, let's help out. But I mean, you could just make a list of anything at any time. And so what about pensioners in that position? What about pensioners who've got literally nothing left at the end of the week? They've bought their food, they've just about paid whatever it is they have to pay out, and there's literally zero left to spend. You could go on that. You could just get to the point there would be no stopping point in this, which is why I asked, as part of this, I put the question in about where does government responsibility start and stop? I mean, the government, the last time I looked, are there to provide a safety net. And it would be quite hard to accuse the government of not at least providing a safety net in the last 6 or 7 months. I mean, something the likes of which we have never seen. It's extraordinary to see what's happened. And the school meal thing, I get when Boris Johnson said, look, we already have a welfare system to do precisely this. Child benefit is there to feed kids. What you're asking us to do is to pay for that again, essentially. To pay for it again. 0344 499 1000. And a huge percentage of the people that affects will be no worse off or better, or certainly no better off, but probably no worse off because of what's happened with COVID. Their situations are already quite challenging and difficult. But that's why there's child benefit there. And I'm not really seeing many people picking up on this point. And then you get into the point that Matey just made there about absent parents. And I'm sort of uncomfortable. Don't buy a packet of fags and a smartphone. Buy yourself a meal. Buy your kids dinner. I'm just a bit uncomfortable with that. I mean, I get it. If that, these are anecdotal stories, and I get that. If that's what somebody is doing, and we know that, I grew up in a world where I saw people around me do exactly that. I mean, the family over the road, the kids would go to school, haven't had a wash in God knows how long. I mean, filthy, and the clothes weren't right. And, if they get a dinner, at some point, about 8 o'clock at night, the mum would go, do you want something to eat? And the kids, just a mess. But she was at the bingo 3 times a week, and they smoked about 180 fags a day between them. So I do know that exists. I don't know how typical that is, so I can't really advance it as an argument, and I don't think that settles it anyway. It just makes us feel... So whilst I get what he was saying, the Tory MP, about absent parents, absent fathers mostly, is probably what he's talking about. Yeah, he's onto something there as well. But I would override all of that by saying, actually, we have a welfare system. We are already paying in that respect. 0344 499 1000. Who pays? Who pays? You can ask the question, do you want to feed hungry kids? I mean, it's just designed, isn't it, to pull out the most seductive image in your head and completely pull on all the purse strings of morality to the greatest possible extent, as taught as you like. And it's designed to, and then when you raise any argument against it, you're an uncaring old git who couldn't give a hoot about anything, and therefore not fit to represent the people of this country. And that is wrong as well, because to try and make capital out of poverty surely is as bad as it gets. And that's what the Labour Party are absolutely doing here. So don't let anybody tell you that they are somehow in a morally superior position on anything. Whose job is it to feed your kids? The state or the individual?